All right, so thank you for coming to my session. Today I'm going to be talking about encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism using Drupal entities. First off, I want to introduce myself. My name is Tom Friedhoff. I work for ActiveLamp. I'm a senior software engineer at ActiveLamp. We're a Drupal agency based out of Los Angeles. We've been working with Drupal for the past 10 years, and we're pretty active in the LA Drupal community. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can go check out @TomFriedhoff or follow us on @ActiveLamp to see any of the content that we're producing and putting out there on the internet. One of the things that I want to mention is we are recording this session. Obviously, you guys can see the cameras. And so we're going to be publishing all 3 sessions that I'm giving this weekend on our YouTube channel, as well as we're doing a highlight video. You've seen Sam, our video producer, around with the SteadyCam and with the drone. We're going to do a highlight video of SandCamp as well, and we're going to publish that on our YouTube channel as well. So if you get a chance, go check out our YouTube channel and subscribe. So the first question I want to ask is, who here is actually using entities and coding entities? Awesome. And then everybody else, as far as modeling your data, I'm assuming probably nodes. You're still using nodes to model your data. So today, this is an intermediate session. I'm not going to be talking about how to actually code entities. There are a lot of tutorials online to actually learn how to code your entities. Today, I'm going to be talking about what a Drupal entity is and why you should use them. So it's going to be less how and more why. Like I said, entities have been out since Drupal 7 came out. Tons of tutorials online. You can get that information on your own and consume that on your own time. However, this is still probably going to be helpful for you if you've never used entities, because at least you'll get a grasp of why entities are good and why you should use them. So before I dive into entities, I want to talk a little bit about where entities came from. And so I've been part of the Drupal community, like I said, for about a decade. I came in around 4.6, 4.7 era. And back then, all we had was this thing called a node, right? And so this node was super magical. We were able to model data with this node with what eventually became, with CCK, a module called CCK that allowed us to add fields onto this node. And so what was really cool about that was we could model any type of data with CCK and nodes. People were coming out with date fields in CCK. They were coming out with all sorts of fields with CCK. And we basically were using this node system as our primary way of modeling data in Drupal. And so around the same time, the views module came out. And so we now had these 2 tools in Drupal that allowed us to build anything we wanted. We were in sort of this Drupal utopia. And I think this is about when Drupal became very popular, is that CCK was something that WordPress didn't have. Views was something that WordPress didn't have, or any of the other content management systems didn't have. And so Drupal really took off at this point, because you can now model any type of data using the UI, using CCK and nodes, and then you could display that data using views. And so basically, with these 2 tools, you're able to build anything you wanted, or win NBA championships with these 2 players. But so basically, CCK plus views made Drupal, in my opinion. That's what caused people to migrate to Drupal. It was just so easy to model data in Drupal by using this system. And the problem with that was everything became a node, right? So users became nodes. Terms became nodes. If you used panels back then, panels became nodes. Everything was a node. Well, why was everything a node back then? Well, because of CCK and views. CCK and views only worked on nodes. But nodes weren't defined as the primary unit of data in Drupal. It wasn't meant to be the primary unit of data in Drupal. And so what happened in Drupal 7, they basically upgraded that system, and they created what was called the entity system. And they changed the name of CCK to Field API. And so basically, in Drupal 7, we have terms now that are entities, and we have users that are entities, and all these entities were fieldable. We basically took the concept that we loved with nodes, and we moved it to entities. And so why was this a good thing? Well, nodes were defined for content editorial workflow. Nodes were never defined as a primary unit of data. And so basically what a Drupal entity is it's a unit of data that you're able to model within the Drupal system. But it's not a node. It's not made specifically for content. When Drupal 7 came out, something was missing. Basically, the entity system wasn't finished when Drupal 7 came out. And so there was a module that you basically have to use when you're coding these entities called the Entity API module. And I'm going to assume everybody in here is using the Entity API module when you're coding at your entities. Okay, great. So basically, what the Entity API module gives you is all the stuff that was missing in Drupal 7 when it got released. And so this stuff now made it into Drupal 8. Now you can get Drupal 8 core, and you have the stuff that was missing, like the CRUD operations, the create, read, update, delete operations. Those are all part of this Entity API module in Drupal 7. That's part of Drupal 8 core. But the most important aspect of the Entity API module, in my opinion, is the fact that you can define your own class. And so why is this so important? Well, because if you define your own class, you have real objects, right? You're no longer dealing with the standard class, the node standard class, right? And so what does that mean? Why is it important to have real objects? Well, with real objects, you can put on methods, you can add methods to this class that correspond to the data that that class uses. So for example, with a node, you can't add any methods to this node data. You have to, if you want to do some sort of operation with the data on a node, you have to write some function somewhere, probably in your .module file, and then you got to pass that node object into there, and then that function will return a modified node object, right? And so that's the completely wrong way to do things. The right way to do it is to add methods directly onto that class. And so here's an example. We wrote a module several years ago for an organization that wanted to basically run tournaments for their esports little league. Well, kind of big league. Not little. And so we wrote a module called Tourney. You can go check this out on GitHub. But this is a snippet of one of the entities that we wrote in there. And so you can see, for example, this is the entity class for we had 3 entities that we defined: a tournament entity, a match entity, and we had a game entity. And so this is a snippet of the match entity. And so basically, with this entity, we could still model it out however we wanted with the field API, right? We can put a title on it using the field API. We didn't have to write any code for that. Field API gives us that. We could put a date and time for that. Field API gives us that. We can still put like who's competing, the contestants, for this. But one of the things that you can't do unless you define your own class or unless you write a function somewhere else is, what if you want to get the winner for that match, right? You could write a function that says determine who the winner is for this particular match and pass in that match. Or you can use an object, you can use a class that defines an object, and when you load that match, just say, get me the winner, right? You're not passing in any objects, any node objects, into a function and returning that. That method is actually on the class, on the object. And so that's encapsulation. So basically the way Wikipedia defines that is, encapsulation is a language mechanism for restricting access to some of the object's components. In this particular example, this second point, a language construct that facilitates the bundling of data with the methods or other functions operating on that data. So basically, we have this data, this entity object, and we're putting all the methods that correspond with this data on the actual class. And so we're encapsulating all that logic into one object. We don't have all this code spread out anywhere else. And so one thing that's nice about this as well, if we go back to the previous slide, you can see that we're calling a method in here called determine winner. And to determine winner is probably doing some advanced logic in there, and that's a private method in there. We don't necessarily want to expose that to our developer API. That's something that when we just get the winner, we're going to determine the winner by going through these different rules. We're also hiding that method and that data that's being processed in there through encapsulation. So what if you have multiple entities, but they're similar, but they have a different model, like they need different fields? So there are a couple of ways that you can handle this. One way is you can create a bundle. Does everybody here know what a bundle is? It's basically a content type. What a content type is to a node, a bundle is to an entity. So you can create a bundle, or you could create a whole other entity. And so if you go the second route, you basically can define your own entity class and have what I was just talking about, all the logic specific to that type of data in its own class, but you're defining a whole another entity, and you're just to get that class. If you go the bundle route, you have to share the same entity class, but that bundle might be a little bit different, but it's only one entity. You just have multiple bundles on it. We're going to talk about both scenarios, but first I'm going to talk about creating another entity. And so basically, the last code snippet that I showed you was the tourney match entity. And we defined 3 entities in that tourney module, which was the tournament entity, the match entity, and the game entity. But those entities were similar. You know, they were enough different that they needed their own entities, but they were similar enough that we were able to extend a base class. And so this is where the power of inheritance comes into play with object-oriented programming and like with the Drupal entity system, defining your own entities. And so here you can see we defined a base class called tourney entity, and we basically said anytime we run save on any of our entities, the match entity, the tournament entity, or the game entity, it's going to actually call this parent save, and then we're going to put a created timestamp and a change timestamp. And once we're done with that, we're going to call the parent save of this and call the real entity class that's part of the Drupal Entity API module. And so what's awesome about this is we're extending functionality that already exists in Drupal. We're only changing what we need to change. This is the power of inheritance. And so inheritance is super powerful. And so I'm going to plug my next session real quick. In the next hour, I'm giving a talk on writing views handlers in G7. And if you've never written a views handler, this is how you write handlers. It's all inheritance. You inherit, you basically extend existing handlers that are in views, and you change the functionality in your class. And so if you guys are interested in seeing how that works with views, definitely come check that out in the next session. All right, so using bundles. Like I said earlier, the problem with using bundles is you share the same entity class. And so if I'm going to use bundles, I kind of want to have my own PHP class for each bundle. And we're working on a project right now for a local university where we have 4 different types of data that are going to integrate with a system called ServiceNow. But they're different enough where we need to have different fields on it, but they're same in the way that we need to integrate with this external system called ServiceNow. And so we had 2 options there. We can write 4 different entities for that and get 4 different classes, or we can write 1 entity and have 1 class. But I don't like the fact that you only have 1 class with that. I want to be able to have 4 different classes specifically for those types of data. And so, like, how do you get around this problem? Has anybody dealt with this problem in here? Okay, so this is a fairly new problem for us because typically when we're defining entities, we typically have like maybe 1 bundle, 1 or 2 bundles on there, and they're pretty much identical. In this particular case, we have 4 types of data. The only commonality is that they're integrating with ServiceNow. I didn't want to create the extra entities, and so we're going the bundle route, but I wanted my own class. And so the way we're actually accomplishing this is we're using a design pattern called the proxy pattern. Anybody familiar with the proxy pattern? Awesome. So basically, the way the proxy pattern works is we have an intermediate class that we actually work with, and if we call a method on the intermediate class, it's going to actually call the method on the real class and return that. And so I'm going to show you what that actually looks like, how we define that in Drupal. And so here's our hook entity info. Let's see, can I scroll this? That's all that's there, okay. And so you can see here, I'm defining an entity class here, and this is the little PSR4 namespacing going on, but we have a class here that we're defining called IT Service Proxy. And so if I look at the actual IT Service Proxy, this is what the constructor looks like. We're basically looking to see if we have a class on this property entity class, and if we don't, if it's null, we're going to make an entity and we're going to pass in basically the bundle here, right? So this is the constructor that Drupal is actually running when we're running entity load, IT service entity ID. It's going to run this constructor and then basically make an entity of the real class. So let me show you what make entity looks like. If I scroll down here, basically what this is doing, this is the private function, so here we got some encapsulation going on here. We're taking in the bundle and we're doing some string manipulation here and getting the name of the class based on the bundle. Let me scroll it over here. So we're passing that bundle in here. We're just making it camel case. And then we're going to actually load that class. We're going to instantiate that class and put it on this property. If the class doesn't exist, we're going to throw an exception. And so basically, now we've loaded this entity, and we have a property on this entity called stdClass that has the loaded object for the class that we really want to use for the logic that we want separated for this particular bundle. Is everybody following me so far? Cool. Awesome. Okay. And so we have this little thing down here called a magic method. Everyone familiar with what a magic method is in PHP? Basically, what a magic method is so there are several magic methods. You have the call, so __ call, __ get, __ set, unset. Bunch of different magic methods. We're using one magic method here called call. And what this does is if we call a method on this class and that method doesn't exist, it's going to run the call method. And what that call method does is it's going to see if that method exists on our entity class that we instantiated in the constructor. And if it doesn't, it's going to return false. But if it does, it's actually going to invoke that method and then return it. We're proxying that method call. And so now we have an entity class for our specific bundles. And so that, my friends, is polymorphism in Drupal. And so I think that's pretty cool. Like you can't, this is object-oriented programming. This is cool. We're able to do this right now in Drupal 7. So, I'm going to show you guys what we actually use. And so at the beginning of the session, I said I wasn't going to show you how to create entities. There are a bunch of tutorials online. But I want to show you how we create entities at ActiveLamp. And so we have, if you've written your own entity, you know how much code goes into writing an entity. And I know in Drupal 8, there are generators to be able to do this. We wrote a generator for this in Drupal 7 using Yeoman. And everybody familiar with what Yeoman is? It's basically a scaffolding tool. And so I've got a little video snippet of what that actually looks like. And so you can see here, I'm creating a new directory called new entity. And so this is going to be my module file. And I'm calling a Yeoman saying yo entity D7. It's going to ask me a few questions about this entity. And so I want to name the entity my new entity, describe what this module does. This is basically going to fill in the description for the .info file. And then it scaffolds out this entire module for me. And so I'm going to just start going through some of these files. And so you can see here's the .module file. That was my hook entity info. There's my bundles. It's got the load functions, the load multiple. It's got permissions in there, access control. There's our hook menu in there. We've got some devel integration in there, admin paths, but that's our .module file. You'll see here I'm going to go into the actual entity class, and we're actually using PSR4 namespaces here. And so it codes that out for us. Let's see what I go into next. I think I go into the devel integration. And so if you're not using devel generate, like use devel generate, this little Yeoman generator creates the devel integration for you. And so like once you've created your entity, now you go create 50 entities with devel, and now you can actually start working with that. And so that's a great tool. And I think that's it. So if you're interested in using that, that's on GitHub. And so you guys can, I'm going to put these slides online, but go to our ActiveLamp GitHub. It's called Generator Entity D7. Feel free to file issues or submit pull requests on it. We've got another generator up there called, I think it's called Drupal All, so Drupal AL. We put a YouTube video out online, I think a month ago, on our Docker and Vagrant workflow and how to get basically a development environment set up with one command called make all. And it basically makes everything. And so go check out our YouTube channel on how that's done. But at the end of that video, I basically show you the Yeoman generator that we created for that. But go check out our ActiveLamp GitHub if you guys are interested in seeing that. And again, I'm just going to shamelessly plug our YouTube channel again. We put videos out on there if you're interested in hearing about some of the things that we're doing at ActiveLamp. Make sure you subscribe. And so that's all I have for you guys today. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate it.